This episode of The Startup Life is tucked in nice and tight by Philip Stein and the Philip Stein Sleep Bracelet. Startup Nation, getting quality sleep is super important, especially for those of us as entrepreneurs. I know for me, if I don't get enough quality sleep, not only do I not perform well while working in my business or exercising, but also it really affects my mental health and that doubt starts to creep in. And that's the last thing we want as entrepreneurs. Also, with everything going on, good quality sleep is important to repair the body and support a good immune system. And that is why, Startup Nation, I wear the Philip Stein Sleep Bracelet. The Philip Stein Sleep Bracelet uses natural frequency technology to reinforce our biomagnetic field to improve deep sleep, length of sleep, and overall sleep quality. This helps produce a healthier heart, regulate weight control, and helps strengthen the immune system, which helps destroy bacteria and viruses. Right now, when you go to philipstein.com, use code SLEEPEZ and you will get 10% off the entire store. That's promo code SLEEP, capital E, capital Z. So if you are ready to be more productive in leading your business, go with the Philip Stein Sleep Bracelet, proven to be natural and safe to give you a better, deeper sleep.
It's time to be about that life, the startup life. Here's your host, Dominic Lawson.
All right, Startup Nation, so I hope you're ready to receive some value today. My name is Dominic Lawson, and this is The Startup Life, the show for entrepreneurs and career-minded professionals. You know, Startup Nation, more and more companies are looking for ways to be more socially aware and more socially engaged. And today's guest is here to share with us not only his thoughts on this approach, but how organizations are reimagining capitalism. He is an award-winning professor at the S.C. Johnson School of Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell University. He is a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh and received his doctorate at the University of Michigan. And he is also the author of his latest book, Better Business: How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. He is Dr. Christopher Marquis. What's up, Dr. C?
Not much. Thanks so much for having me on your program, Dominic.
Oh, no worries, man. No worries. Look, we can definitely use your insight. Are you ready to pour some knowledge into Startup Nation today?
I'll do my best.
I hear that. So first things first, Dr. C, if you would just kind of share with us your origin story, if you don't mind.
Sure. Origin story. So how far back should I go? That's a lot.
You can start you don't have to go deep into the weeds, but just kind of, okay, I'll tell you this. What was Dr. C like as a kid? Kind of share that with me.
I had just a regular old, suburban U.S. upbringing. You sort of see in the movies, So it was this, at the time didn't realize it, but now I like much more sort of urban environments and busy places. But it was, I rode my bike around, and it was a pretty relaxed, pretty relaxed upbringing. And I think, it's interesting. I try to think about how that has any sort of effect on what I do currently.
Sure.
I do think that there was just a general interest in fairness in life. Sort of people would be treated well, people would be treated equally. And as I started studying business, I really found that I felt that there was a lot of sort of inequities in the system. And I think that's sort of what would cause me to sort of study the things I've been studying on, sustainability,
right,
stakeholder focus, inequality, that I've really been focusing on for now about 15 years.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. And that kind of brings us to your book. And once again, that book, Startup Nation, is Better Business: How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. So let's dive into the book a little bit, because we've been seeing the rise of B Corp organizations for quite a while, for quite the past few years now. Kind of talk about that. Why are we seeing this right now in this point in time?
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons. So one is demographically. I've been teaching on, broadly speaking, the topic of social responsible business for about 10, 15 years now.
Right.
And when I started, it was a very, very niche class, had not that many students take it.
Gotcha.
But in the last few years, between millennials, Gen Z, people are just so enthusiastic about, being able to bring sort of their purpose, values to work. This is among these younger generations, and so these businesses have just exploded because younger consumers are more interested in them. They're interested in them as a place for work. So I think that's sort of one reason.
For sure.
I think another reason is that I think sort of the bigger, sort of broader business environment has also beginning to recognize that accounting for stakeholders is really, really important. So, you probably heard of this business roundtable, this trade group of the 200 most powerful, largest CEOs in America. They came out with a statement saying, we used to have a statement saying that business should be shareholder focused. We're going to change that and say the purpose of business is to serve stakeholders like employees, customers, make sure the environment is well taken care of. And so I think these two things, one, sort of the broader, external environment saying, we need a more sustainable capitalism because, environment damage is out of control, the, income inequality, systemic racism issues,
right.
Really suggest that business should be better in many ways. And then also, there's this great set of young millennial and Gen Z consumers and employees that really want to bring their purpose to their purchases and career. And so I think the convergence of these two has led this idea to really take off.
For sure. Let me ask you this, because I know it's not just the entrepreneur who's kind of being more socially aware and having that part in their business, but it seems like the market itself, a lot of millennials, look, I'm a millennial. I'm one of those older millennials, 82. And so okay. I know that I've gone through 9/11. I've gone through the 2008 economic, crisis and stuff like that. I know a lot of my peers are like, I've seen greed and I've seen what it's done to people. It's like, I don't want that. And I want to do business
right.
with, brands that kind of, have that social part in there. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Oh, definitely. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. That's, so for the book, I interviewed, over 60 B Corps. And this is on top of a lot of other, case studies and other interviews I've done. And this is something that really comes through, very clear in talking to these companies, that they feel that there is the, younger demographic really wants exactly what you're saying.
Right. Because I guess I was just curious, is it the business driving driving this, or is it the market driving it? I guess I was just curious about which one is kind of like making the bigger impact, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't, it's hard to say. Fair enough. Be honest. I think both are hugely important. And I certainly don't think, because I've seen it just in the growth among my students, and then also with, as I mentioned, sort of all these businesses reporting to me, like when they do their market research studies and sort of see their consumers, that, this idea of millennial consumers, Gen Z consumers, really shaping the marketplace now. And it's going to be a huge trend even more in the future. I think that there's a lot to be said for that being maybe the primary focus.
For sure. And, one of the things that I'm starting to see that I'm pretty curious about, because when we talk about stakeholders, right, we obviously think about, the customer, we think about other employees, we think about, senior level management, but it also kind of spills into other people like, vendors that maybe the business works with, or maybe, maybe not direct consumers that the businesses kind of cater to, which I kind of find fascinating as well. So it's almost like the term stakeholder is kind of broadening, if you will. Are you seeing that as well?
Oh, definitely. I think that's something that I think there's still a lot more sort of thinking that needs to go on around that. Okay. But I think that, each and every business really in some ways has its own unique set of stakeholders. Right. And so, I think you're exactly right. I think vendors, suppliers are a hugely important and not frequently well considered set of stakeholders. In the COVID pandemic, I think, it really came to the fore. I read some stories about how some in the fast fashion industry, they close their stores, no one's buying their products. So they just left a bunch of their suppliers in, places like Vietnam and Bangladesh just in the lurch. I mean,
Right.
and didn't really take care of them. So I think that, with some of the economic issues that we've had, people are sort of putting those pieces together and sort of understanding, like, okay, it's, you have some stakeholders that you need to be responsible for.
For sure, for sure. It just goes to show, and once again reinforces that in a global economy, we really are kind of dependent on one another in some way,
Right.
shape, form, or fashion. So I appreciate you sharing that for sure. I wanted to
Right.
ask, yeah, for sure. I wanted to ask you about one of the chapters in your book because, chapter 10, big isn't always bad, because we always talk about capitalism in this dog eat dog world. And like some people, some companies just get too big, and it just kind of goes with the notion that like, oh, well, they're like all, this big time Fortune 500 company. They don't care about the little guy anymore. But you got to talk about in a different approach. Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. And actually that readers, I mean, I hope that not readers, listeners, I hope that they, are interested enough to buy the book. But if not, actually chapter 10, I wrote a Stanford Social Innovation review article based on chapter 10. So they can go on the web, I think probably get that for free if they're interested.
For sure.
But the point of that chapter is how the model that B Corp, that B Lab and B Corps have developed is being more and more used by large companies. And the real big example there in that chapter is Danone. They're a French $30 billion, health and dairy and all kinds of different sort of food and nutrition products.
Right.
And they have committed to really integrating this B Corp ideas into their whole company. They've certified B Corps already over 20 of their subsidiaries and have committed to, certifying all of, the whole organization. And I had the really nice opportunity to interview the CEO of Danone to understand their COVID response and to do this idea of stakeholders we were just talking about.
Right.
Had a very systematic way of thinking. Okay, here's this crisis. What are we going to do for our employees? And they had a bunch of different sort of work, salary guarantees, suppliers, things like milk, which, there's a lot of issues of milk sort of going unused because,
Absolutely.
Couldn't fit into the production line. So they thought, well, how to take care of that? Shareholders frequently, people think about sort of employees or consumers, or even suppliers as stakeholders, but shareholders another, and they sort of creatively thought about how to deal with the shareholders. So this idea of here's this large organization, and why I really highlight that is because that's created a model in some way of how other organizations can adopt these B Corp ideas. And let me just take a step back and say, so the listeners who might not be familiar with B Corps, it's what it is. It's a certification, sort of like fair trade or LEED certified building, but it's a certification for an overall company on the extent to which it meets like social and environmental provisions. And many companies like Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's, Allbirds, Kickstarter, Bombas, et cetera, are sort of well-known ones. But that's not really. It's been really sort of the smaller startups that have been sort of famous for B Corps, being B Corps. And you can imagine, you're starting a company, and you're small. It's easy to institute these ideas, but really when you grow, it's more of a challenge because you're sort of a lot of times there ends up being a tension between sort of the financial bottom line and the social bottom line.
Right.
And for companies like Danone that have existed for a long period of time, how to actually change the company to orient towards these ideas is a challenge. So there's been a big movement to take this model to large companies, and there's a number of them. Natura is a large cosmetics company out of Brazil. They recently purchased Avon. They own The Body Shop. Unilever is also very involved in this movement. So,
Right.
so increasingly, there's large companies that are taking this on, and I hope that more companies will do it because companies talk about stakeholder management,
Right.
but how to actually do that, how to actually become a stakeholder driven company is sort of very hard to think about. And hard to do when you're this massive company. But with the B Lab tools and processes, it's actually sort of like almost a playbook to be more stakeholder driven. So I hope that more and more large companies will continue to come onto this movement because it'll really help them with their interest in being more stakeholder driven.
For sure. And I imagine a lot of times what happens is like, you want to get on board with that process, but a lot of times as, quarterly earnings statement starts, you got to report those quarterly earnings and maybe projections. You didn't meet certain projections and stuff like that. And so you kind of go back to that default setting of like, forget the stakeholder. I got to get this money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I definitely understand that. But you said something that I thought was interesting. It kind of goes back to your book a little bit. Chapter 6, employees are the heart of the company. And you talked about employees and COVID. And we've been seeing or hearing this phrase essential workers. And, so kind of talk about that a little bit, talk about that juxtaposition between what you talk about in the book and what we're seeing currently during the era of COVID.
Yeah. So that's, a couple of ways to think about that. So,
sure.
First at a general level, before sort of thinking about COVID, this idea of treating employees well, it sounds so obvious that of course,
right.
these are people, and they're here sort of working, spending their day for the company. Of course but surprisingly, many as we know, sort of many companies don't sort of follow through on that. And so, the B Corps have a variety. There's huge diversity. So I don't want to talk in sort of overly generalized.
Sure.
But through having really great benefits, good, fair living wages, they end up having better retention numbers. So, it's many companies that I studied, if you compare them to their peers, their retention is, multiple times higher. So whereas, maybe in some, sort of fast casual type restaurants,
right,
turnover would be maybe 90%, 100% a year. For the B Corps, it's down, 30%, 40% a year, sometimes even lower. There's a number of examples where, the companies I studied have, just dramatically lower turnover, much higher retention than other companies. Another side of the other side of the coin of that is also then attraction of the employees. So, I interviewed a B Corp leader recently, and someone had asked them, what's the biggest benefit you have? And what she said was that, I never have to think about employees, sort of hiring anyone, basically, because no one leaves. And when I'm growing, I've got a line outside the door of people that want to work for me. There are, again, it's sort of the millennial, Gen Z, people want to work for B corporations. I mean, there are job boards set up for this. And so many of the B Corps that I've talked to have said, when the HR person asks, or maybe it's part of actually the employment form, why do you want to work here? Many people say it's because you're a B Corp. So I think that, this idea of actually having a socially and environmentally friendly company, really makes the employees happier, culture better, and that spills over to the bottom line. It's interesting. I think that in terms of COVID, I talked to a number of B Corps, some in the retail industry, which was hard hit because many stores had to close down.
Right.
And I mean, businesses are businesses. I mean, they sometimes have to make hard decisions,
right,
and lay people off. But the amount of thought that went into, like, how can we do this if we do have to lay people off, in a way where we can sort of, have the benefits extend, try not to lay them off. Also, essential workers, you mentioned, one of the companies I talked to, they had this great idea that, they were a sort of an essential industry. So as a manufacturing company, people had to come into the factory as a food product manufacturer. And they said, we understand that employees might be afraid, and we're going to set this, we're basically going to pay them to not come in if they really feel that it's too dangerous for them to come in because of the health condition. It wasn't as much as a whole day. I think it was around half, but at least they got something.
Right.
Then they also, because this is something that affects the community as well. So they said, okay, how can we help our community? And so they then started, bringing in dinners from, nothing too expensive. I think they said, ends up being, about $10 per head. But in order to help the businesses in their community, they then started this program where they would bring in dinners from local restaurants. So for me, talking to these companies, and I think that having this real stakeholder orientation, it changes how you think about things. So there's this shutdown, and immediately you're not thinking about, okay, I got to save as much money as possible. You think about, okay, so how can I, be humane and be creative too in extending my business or shutting it down in a way that makes it as effective as possible for everyone.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. And you brought up something that I didn't even think about, is that if you're a B Corp, that can be a tool to not only to attract talent. I didn't even think about that. That's quite interesting. I never thought about that before, but I appreciate you bringing that up.
If you ask me what the biggest benefit of being a B Corp is, it's actually on the employee attraction to retention. I think that, many people see these social oriented businesses and think it's all about attracting consumers. And I think that there is, as we discussed, increasingly consumers are really interested in these type of businesses. But I think that the biggest economic benefit is, attraction and retention of employees.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. C, I want to ask you this because we like I said, we've been seeing the rise of B Corp corporations, stuff like that. What are some of those things that, like, if I'm a startup and I want to incorporate and I'm thinking about a B Corp, we've kind of talked about a lot of the benefits, but what are some of those maybe challenges or maybe some of those things that, like, I need to maybe take a second look if that's the direction I want to go?
Sure. I think a couple of things, and I think these are mostly short-term things. And so I am, relatively bullish on the benefits of this. But I think it's time commitment. It's a rigorous evaluation, and it takes time, and a number of people, it's interesting. I've heard diverse opinions on, some people said they heard about it in New York City, and they were taking a train from New York City to Boston, and they did the whole evaluation between New York City and Boston. Right. So that's a couple hours. But other people, it takes months to go through. So one is the time involved. And I think as I'm an entrepreneur, but many of your listeners, I'm sure, are. Any entrepreneur I talk to about the time and making sure you prioritize the most important things and fill your time with doing the most valuable things for your business is a huge thing. So I think the time is an issue. There's also a cost to it. It's scaled based on revenue, and I don't know the exact scaling. It's not a ton, but there is a cost, and I know that's something that people also is another potential downside. But on the flip side of that, particularly the sort of the time it takes to fill out the assessment, so many businesses, particularly smaller businesses, told me that, they learn so much about running a business from actually going through the assessment that, it ended up making them a much better business. And there's, some researchers have actually studied B Corps, and, B Corps are much more likely to survive. So if you're founded, you become a B Corp. If you compare it to cohorts of companies that started around the same time as you, the B Corp is much more likely to survive. And perhaps it is because of, having gone through this, like it's almost like management 101 or toolkit for running your business, makes them sort of more resilient, more sustainable. And that's ultimately why I named the book Better Business, because, so many companies I talked to, or leaders at companies, said, I went into this thinking it was about me trying to be more socially and environmentally responsible. Mm-hmm. But I came out of it, and the biggest thing that that came out of doing this process is that I'm a better business. My business as a whole is just so much better.
All right, Startup Nation, so we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We got to pay some bills. Once again, my name is Dominic Lawson, and you're listening to The Startup Life. This fresh coat of the Startup Life has been sprayed on nice and smooth by Wagner and the Flexio series of paint sprayers. Startup Nation, my wife decided she wanted to rehab her childhood home. The goal was to fix it up and invite a nice family to rent it out. We knew one of the biggest jobs we had to undertake was painting. However, from the walls, the cabinets, and even the siding outside, it was going to be a big task. As entrepreneurs with a company to run, we knew this was going to take up a lot of our time, which is why we decided to get a paint sprayer. And after much research, we decided to go with the sprayer from the Flexio series from Wagner. Startup Nation, these sprayers are top-notch because of its flexibility to paint or stain walls, furniture, cabinets, and more. It's 10 times faster than using a paintbrush, which was a big selling point for us. And you can paint or stain right from the can. It's also easy to clean in 5 minutes, and being great for indoor and outdoor projects, a paint sprayer from the Flexio series clearly needs to be part of the arsenal in your garage. So if you're ready to stain your deck, or like me, fill your daughter's request of a bubblegum pink room, up your game with a paint sprayer from the Flexio series by Wagner. Take it from me, your time will thank you. This episode is sponsored by Swanson Health. Startup Nation, Swanson Health has been producing quality vitamins and supplements, foods, healthy home, and self-care products for over 50 years, since 1969. From the heart of America, Swanson Health carries over 20,000 wellness products at a great value. Pick up all of your favorite health products, plus discover new ones for your wellness routine, all while leaving money in your pocket. If you want to try any of Swanson Health's great products for yourself, use code STARTUP20 for 20% off at swanson.com. We have a link there in the show notes if you listen to the replay. This episode of The Startup Life is powered by Colony Spark. Startup Nation, with our economy in flux, there is a lot of mixed messaging out there. If there was ever a time to take control of the narrative and let your customers know that you're here to serve them, it's now. And that's why you have a friend in Colony Spark. Colony Spark is an omni-channel marketing agency that believes in the power of community to ignite your business. They have helped companies across many industries with lead generation, revenue growth, and more to put them on the path to success. My guy Bill Murphy and his team are very good at what they do. How do I know this? Because not many SEO companies have the stamp of approval of being partnered with Google. Yes, that Google. So I want you to go to www.colonyspark.com/startup to schedule a meeting today. In that meeting, you will review your current marketing activity, receive actionable advice on how to pivot and grow, and ask any marketing questions you may have on navigating over the next few months. Look, Startup Nation, I know things may seem uncertain right now, but if you are looking for a business partner that can help light the way, go with Colony Spark, where they firmly believe in business helping business. All right, Startup Nation, welcome back as we continue our conversation with today's guest here on The Startup Life. Once again, Startup Nation, we are talking to Dr. Christopher Marquis, the author of Better Business, How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. I want to ask you this because I know that, you have extensive experience in B Corp, but you also have extensive experience and knowledge about doing business in China. I know you teach a class there in Cornell. I'm curious about what's that B Corp movement? Is there a similar movement in China as it is here in the United States? Or is it a little different?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's different.
Okay.
So we have, I guess, both are sort of the same and different. So
for sure.
So the B Corp movement is a global movement. So
Right.
It started in the U.S., but actually there's more B Corps outside the U.S. than inside the U.S. And I think that actually these larger B Corps that I talked about, those are European and South American countries are where I think these large companies are getting on the movement. In China also has a very early sort of nascent B Corp movement. And I mean, I think there's about between 20 and 30 B Corps right now, but it is a really passionate group of folks. I mean, I'm really impressed. I mean, I have because I do a lot of work in China, I do a lot of work on WeChat. And so I will get updates almost every day. They're having some event about, learn about the B impact assessment, or we have support this new B Corp. So it's a very, sort of very vibrant movement, although sort of still very early. And I'll say that one of the things that is both a challenge and hopefully an opportunity is that, because the B impact assessment, this, evaluation I've mentioned, started in the U.S., it's very focused on, or a lot of the standards are from the perspective of the U.S. So let me give you an example.
Sure.
So in China, for instance, things like, sustainable building standards don't exist. So, that's something where it's off the table. The idea of having a living wage, it's very hard to figure out because, if you're in Shanghai, it's totally different than if you're in some other location in China, and there's just not the data to evaluate that. So, the standards are very much U.S. oriented in some way. There's work being done to really globalize the standards, and a lot of work's been done around that. But still, for places like China, on the flip side, if you're in like Scandinavia or Germany, the almost laws, around things like living wages and sustainable buildings, et cetera, are such that, you're going to, sort of pass the threshold much easier because, actually the baseline there is much different. So I know the B Lab folks have worked a lot to really customize the evaluation based on, the geography that the company's in, also the industry that the company's in. I mean, if you're a bank, your environmental impacts, for instance, are much different than you're a manufacturing firm. And then also the size of the firm. If you're a large firm, things are much different than you're a smaller firm. So this is something that, it's very complex to try to evaluate companies. And I think, work has been done on the sort of geography, industry, and size to try to customize things so that there's a useful set of standards.
For sure. Thank you for sharing. I want to ask you this. You say you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners quite often. When they ask you about doing business in China, what is some of that advice you give them? Because I know a lot of times people want to do business in China, and it's a little different than doing business in the U.S. So what is some of that advice you give them that maybe you would normally get? Unless you just dive in, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the main thing is, you have to have a very good person on the ground there, like local connection.
Right.
And, because for a number of reasons, one, you're not going to be there often. Two, the language, presumably is a language barrier.
Right.
And then three, also, I think just the business culture is very different. So, for instance, a lot of business is done over meals, as opposed to the U.S. You would do things in meetings, and also things are, done over a much more sort of extended period of time. And it'd be very hard to sort of, for instance, negotiate a contract without sort of knowing all these subtle norms. And so I think having sort of finding and employing a very good sort of middleman almost that can, that knows the context of China and can represent you is really essential. It's very hard, if you don't have that, because you just will miss all the important cultural cues that are necessary.
For sure. I'm curious about something. It's something I've been kind of fascinated with China a little bit because, animosities aside, it's quite the story. If you imagine, it's the second largest economy in the world. It's one of the fastest growing economies on the planet. And it's just fascinating. I'm curious about something though. If you could just pinpoint one on a timeline, like that one moment that kind of led to where China is now, what would that point of that timeline be? Would it be when Nixon went over to kind of talk to the Chinese people? Is it when the 2008 Olympics and it was kind of like this coming out party? What would be that point on the timeline? It's like, that's the moment, the fulcrum point where like things kind of turned in favor of Chinese and the Chinese economy.
Yeah. So I think very, very clearly it's 1978.
Okay.
And that was when, Mao, the prior leader, since the Chinese Revolution in 1949,
right,
died in 1976. And there was a little bit of uncertainty a few years, but then by 1978, someone named Deng Xiaoping ended up taking over as sort of the primary leader of the country. And he decided that, this very planned economy needed to change and open up and be much more market oriented. Mm-hmm. And he basically 180 changed the country. And if you look, before then, I forget what the average GDP was, per capita GDP, maybe a couple hundred US dollars.
Right.
And then it just has grown, a lot ever since then. I think
for sure.
Since 1978 until maybe last year, China had grown on average close to 10% a year. And, now, at first it was easy to grow 10% because, it's a small, sort of small country in some ways economically. But now, growing even 6, 7, 8% on, the second largest economy in the world is tremendous. And
right.
So I think the changes from really is very strictly planned to a much more market-oriented economy started in 1978. And then there were all these experiments. They sort of said, okay, we're going to open this city up for market activity and let's see what happens. And then sort of slowly let that expand to other cities. So I think that's the big change. The Olympics was very big too, actually,
sure.
I think.
Yeah, because like I said, like the 2008 Olympics, it seemed like it was kind of like, 1978 is where like kind of the work started and stuff like that. What you're saying, but it seemed like 2008 was kind of like that moment. It's like China is here and they're not going anywhere for a long time as an economic power. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that this 2 week, pep rally almost, if you will.
No, I think that's really was seen, and I think it was a real conscious decision. If you look at so the Olympics were in Beijing in 2008,
right,
and then in 2010 was the World Expo in Shanghai. And then in 2012 was another large sort of Asian games. I think it was something, gotcha. I forget the name of it, in Guangzhou. And so, I think that, China said, we're coming out and being a global leader. And we're going to show the world through these major events that, how much we've accomplished and what our power is. And I think that's exactly,
For sure. Once again, Startup Nation, we're actually wrapping up with Dr. Christopher Marquis, the author of Better Business, how the B Corp movement is remaking capitalism. And if you're listening to the replay on the podcast, we have a link there in the show notes for easy access for you to go ahead and purchase that book. I think it's something you may want to definitely put in your entrepreneurial toolkit for sure. So we talked about at the top of the show, Dr. C, that you are, you're a professor at Cornell. And so you're kind of in charge of scoping the next, future leaders of business in this country and abroad. What are some of those tenets that you try to share with them and try to remind them as you kind of instill knowledge and share what you've kind of learned over the years?
Yeah, I think that, so one thing, if you're an entrepreneur, I think that, having a purpose that sort of goes beyond just selling more products, I think is
Right.
tremendously important. I think this is one of the things that really drew me to the B Corp work, because it, sort of helps attract and bind your employees. I think another sort of key thing that is often, it sounds sort of almost too boring, but it's really important, is sort of measuring what matters. And I think that the ESG, the social and environmental governance things, are also important. But being really clear in what you measure on the financial side is also important too. So I think that this, if people want sort of advice, I mean, it's sort of have a purpose bigger than just selling things, but then also being really detail oriented in implementing your business and making sure that you're measuring what matters and tracking and actually what's going on.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Let me ask you this, Dr. C. I'm have a little fun with you. So if I were to ask one
Sure.
of your students, what type of professor or teacher that you are, what would they tell me? Are you the philosopher? Are you the hard grader? Are you the what's that teaching style they would tell me, Dr. C?
Yeah, good question. You have to ask them. I mean, I think I do have some thoughts on this. I'm getting ready for my next teaching term, so I always go back and look at my teaching evaluations from the prior, from the prior year, to sort of think like, okay, what sort of things should I start to change? What sort of new things should I do? And just in the last few days, I was looking at the most recent teaching evaluations, and one of the things, there's always things I can improve on, but I think one of the things that I really appreciated that came through a lot of the evaluations was that I really sort of fostered a very supportive sort of discussion environment in the class, and was very open to many diverse perspectives, and really tried to make sure all the students were sort of heard and respected. So I think it's I don't think I'm a particularly hard grader. I mean, my feeling is that I teach graduate students.
Gotcha.
So, this is, you get what you put into things in life. Right. And, I think maybe, college or high school, you have to sort of force people to do things. But, if you're a graduate student, and if you're, if you just want to skate by, I think you're the one who's going to lose. I mean, it's not me. I mean, I don't, people have to do the work, of course, but so I don't think it's, that known as a hard grader, but I do think it's one that I want people to learn and improve themselves. And so, those comments that I read, I really appreciate that, because I think that's really what I aspire to in my teaching, to have, sort of a warm and supportive learning environment so that everyone can get better.
For sure. You ever had a student where, respectfully, of course, you have had a student kind of challenge something that you said, and it made you kind of like rethink certain things from time to time, whether it be business or something like that? Yeah. Kind of talk about that. Yeah,
totally. So I think, and I think this is part of what the students were saying. Like so the way I teach is the case study method. So it's very much all about, we come in, we've, read a case study, and it's usually sort of ambiguous what decisions should be made, and there are a lot of complexities, and you could argue sort of one way or another, or a third way or a fourth way. And the idea is that I think the students, I might be the expert in the room, but the students' collective knowledge and expertise is way more than mine. And so I really encourage people to challenge the material, challenge me. And I think even my interest in B corporations came about from student challenging me, actually. So I was teaching, before Cornell, I was teaching at Harvard Business School.
Right.
And I was teaching a class on corporate social responsibility. So we're studying big companies like, IBM, or as an example, and a student in a class one day, just in the middle of class, said, we should not be studying these large companies. Their CSR programs are great, but they're just tack-ons in some way. We should really be studying companies like B corporations that have mission embedded inside of their purpose. And this was in 2009. Right. And I must admit, I was a little embarrassed. I had never, here they're basically sort of challenging the whole sort of architecture and purpose of the class that I was teaching. And, so I, respectfully listened and said, that's a great, interesting idea, and asked him to explain a little bit more. I was really surprised, many businesses like, the Patagonia, Method Home Products, Seventh Generation that I had heard of and respected were B Corps, but I had never heard of it until that day. And so I went back to my office and Googled very quickly and learned about the B Corp movement, and that led me to get in touch with B Lab and ask them if I could actually write a Harvard Business School case study about their work and in this B Corp idea. And this was back in 2010 when there were actually under 300 B Corps.
Right.
And that really sort of started me on that journey. And I, were it not for a student challenging, the very purpose of the class I was teaching, I never would have had that. And so I think that, I really encourage the students to challenge and push, because certainly there's a lot of things they know that I don't, and I want to learn and make the class better.
That's extremely profound, Dr. C. Like, not many people are willing to say that, because like I said, I was going to ask that, but you beat me to the point. It seems like that student, questioning that, kind of shifted your focus a little bit. We may not even have this book if not for that student, maybe
I think definitely.
I don't know. Yeah, for sure.
I think definitely.
For sure. Thank you for sharing all of that, for sure. So, I wanted to say, before we kind of wrap, I just want to say thank you so much once again for coming on the show, Dr. C. And once again, Startup Nation, that book is Better Business: How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. If you're listening to the replay on the podcast, we have a link there in the shows. Link there in the notes, show notes. I can't talk, Dr. C. I'm sorry. We have a link there in the show notes for easy access, for sure. I'm going to keep that in there, by the way. But for right now, I'm actually going to turn the microphone over to you, Dr. C, because look, you're starting to, like I said, you're teaching the next MBAs, the next, mid-level managers, senior level managers in business, here in our country and worldwide. Give them some words of encouragement to kind of take us out for today, especially seeing that everything is going on.
Yeah, no, I think that I know it's tough. I actually, when I finished my MBA, it was in 1994, which was, it wasn't the worst job market ever, but it was a bad job market.
Right.
And it was really very frustrating, because I would go on all these job interviews, couldn't get a job, had to move back in and spend some time living with my parents still. I was, my mid-20s. This was a little bit, embarrassing and frustrating. But finally ended up getting a job, thankfully. And then I ended up going back to get a PhD a little bit later, which is a whole other story. But, our lives are long. That's now, 25 years ago for me. And I've always really tried to think long term and think about, okay, how can I build a career that actually means something to me and hopefully the world. And I think that, in these times that are really discouraging and it's hard to find a job and the economy's doing very poorly, it's, obviously people need to make a living and pay the rent and do all those things. But, really trying to keep your eye on the long term and think about, okay, how can I build a career that when I look back 25 years later, I'm proud of it, and I feel like I've made a difference, because every day we have to go to work every day, and to just if you want to doing something that you're miserable in is tough.
Thank you for sharing all of that, for sure. And that's going to wrap up our session here on the Startup Life. Dr. C, thank you so much for your time and your content, man. I really appreciate it.
Great. And thanks so much for having me, Dominic. It was great to have a talk. And it's, you brought me back to many things that I hadn't thought about in a long time. So that's always a sign of a good interviewer.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. The check's in the mail. And as always, Startup Nation, if you have an idea, be about that life. The Startup Life. If you want to let us know what you think about our show, have an idea for a show topic, or would like to advertise on our show, send us a message on the Startup Life Podcast Facebook page. And while you are there, like and follow our page as well. It's a great way for us to engage with you, Startup Nation, and really grow our community. The link is there in the show notes. Subscribe to the show, as it can be heard on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or even on your Facebook timeline or any other platform you like to get your podcast. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts and you find our content valuable, please give us a 5-star rating, as it will help us climb the charts and help more people find our show. You can also listen to the show on the Startup Life Podcast new website. There you will find the all-new Startup blog, where I write on many topics that are interesting and helpful to you on your path to entrepreneurship. And hey, if you have an idea, be about that life, the startup life.